Hello, everybody. Welcome to the One Spark Network. My name is Eric J. Hecker, and I'm your host, and I am joined today by Dr. Diane Hennacy Powell. Diane is a Johns Hopkins-trained psychiatrist, neuroscientist, and internationally recognized expert on autism and savant syndrome. Formerly on the faculty at Harvard Medical School and an original member of a prestigious human origins think tank at the Salk Institute. She has spent decades blending rigorous clinical practices with cutting-edge scientific inquiry. Dr. Powell is widely celebrated for her pioneering, though controversial, research into human consciousness and the extraordinary nonverbal capabilities of non-speaking autistic individuals. Her profound insights into telepathy, neurodiversity, and unique savant skills have been featured in her book, The ESP Enigma, and served as the cornerstone for the viral, chart-topping podcast series, The Telepathy Tapes. Welcome, Diane.
Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure.
It's quite a past you have there. Very interesting. I love the consciousness topic, and I can only imagine, obviously, you do too.
Oh yeah. I was fascinated by consciousness before I even knew the term.
Oh, geez. Okay, fantastic. When do you think that started?
Well, so first of all, I come from a scientific background. My father was a scientist with degrees in three different branches of science, and we grew up with a laboratory in the basement and playing with science kits.
There you go.
And what I really enjoyed the most was things like, the walks we'd take in the woods and the critters I'd bring home, or the animals from the lab that my dad would bring home that would become my pets, and just observing them and trying to see if I could understand their behavior and, just, through observation and then, studied animal behavior, ethology, where you're in the field like Jane Goodall, where you're actually doing a lot of observational work. And so I applied that to, humans. That's what I was interested in understanding, was human consciousness, but it using the same kind of skills. In fact, people have called me sort of the Jane Goodall of autism.
There you go. Well, excellent. Diane, looking back at the beginning of your career, what were the prevailing misconceptions about autism and savant syndrome? And what was your personal, ordinary world before you realized the full depth of this field?
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's a lot to unpack.
Fair enough. Just kind of basically, where were you at before? Obviously, so yes, childhood, science, the rearing, but, right before you got into autism and savant syndrome, where were you at then?
So I first heard of autism when I was finishing up my training at Johns Hopkins, where I trained in neuropsychiatry. And I met Oliver Sacks, who had just written a book, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. And then he had this case study of these two identical twins who were institutionalized because they couldn't take care of themselves. And yet they had these abilities that really defied our understanding of what the brain's capable of doing. In other words, one of the things they did was they would play this game where one would say a six-digit prime number, and then the other one would say what the next consecutive six-digit prime number would be, and they'd go back and forth. And Oliver Sacks was able to validate them to 12 digits. They actually gave prime numbers in digits beyond that, 20 digits, but computers couldn't calculate that at the time. And the fact that they said they saw the answers rather than derive the answers made me go, wow, I really want to understand autism. So I went to the Institute of Psychiatry in London and studied with Sir Michael Rutter, who was knighted for his work on autism. And autism was extremely rare back then. But I was able to spend 6 months with him and train at a time where I learned from him all of the things that could get labeled autism, but really aren't. And so how to really differentiate it. And what I'd say is today, there are a lot of kids that are getting labeled autistic that would not have gotten labeled autistic before. But there's also an actual increase in the number of kids that are, their brain development is just very, very
Yeah,
different.
it seems to be a bit more complex in how the numbers are going up, for
Yeah, it's
sure.
it's it's multiple different factors.
Yeah.
But so I saw them as sort of the Rosetta Stone to understanding consciousness, and that's what got me into it. And I can't think of anything more fascinating than their abilities. I
It is.
mean, it's just phenomenal. And so it was while I was studying savant syndrome that I then found out that they had these other abilities. But I had predicted that, I mean, I thought savant abilities where people can like know mathematics or music without ever having formally studied it. I thought, that acquisition of knowledge from an unknown place reminded me so much of what psychics are like. Oh, well, yeah, I could tell you what this location looks like halfway around the world, and it's like, or into the future or whatever. It's still getting information from somewhere that you don't even think information should be.
It is very interesting to observe in my past, and when I was in New York, my in-laws, one of my sister-in-laws had triplet boys, and each one had a different degree of autism. So it was super interesting. They're brothers, they're triplets, they're the same, they're different. But all stricken, so to say, for lack of a better term, with one being slightly autistic, one being heartily autistic, and then the other one right in between. It was yeah, it's wild the way that the brain seems to work for us, and the big question mark that sits there inside of our head.
Yeah.
They say that every hero's journey begins with a specific catalyst, Diane. Was there a specific moment, case study, or question that pulled you into dedicating this to be your life's effort of work?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'd say there have been multiple. I would say that the sort of the arc of the hero's journey really fits the arc of my life, because it's like this sort of ups and downs, and you're just like, oh no, all's hopeless, everything from the why me to
Mm-hmm.
everything.
Yep.
Um, but I'd say, I mean, the first major catalyst was when I was at Harvard. And here, this was a dream come true, really nice faculty position at Harvard. And then I meet this patient when I'm doing a consultation at Cambridge Hospital with this woman who wanted to sign down to get medical advice. And the staff thought that she was mentally ill because she was saying she saw ghosts and that she was psychic. And then I go to meet her, and within 5 minutes, she starts telling me that she's getting a reading on me, and she starts telling me all these things about myself that she had no way of knowing.
Mm-hmm. I've
Yeah.
I've experienced that a little bit. I don't. I would say the person I don't believe was autistic, but I can definitely say I've worked with an individual where, from my perspective, it was like they were walking through the hallways of the memory banks of my mind and were able to select things to discuss. And it was the weirdest thing because, from my perspective, it was, this is happening.
Right, right. And this person wasn't autistic either. She was half Native American and half African American.
Mm-hmm.
And she said she was born with a caul over her face. And I'd never heard that, being born with, and that's the afterbirth, such that, she was probably deprived of oxygen for a short period of time after birth.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that according to folklore has this propensity to increase psychic abilities. It's a sign of somebody who's going to be very psychic. And so, but the things she said to me were so specific. I mean, she said, your husband's a chemist and he's applying for a job in 2 different cities right now. I mean, that's the first thing she says right off the bat. My husband was a biochemist applying for a postdoc in 2 different cities right then.
Yeah, I mean, she got kind of close to the mark.
And then she even told me, which city we would end up moving to, and I knew that was one of the 2 cities, and that is the city we moved to. And she told me all kinds of things, and they all came true.
Yep.
And that, to me, that really, I thought, well, I'm not going to waste my time working on a theory to understand the brain and consciousness. that can't explain this.
Hmm.
And so it took me down all of these different, you know, little, corridors, and studying, everything from quantum physics to, more esoteric studies, just trying to make sense of this. Yeah, so that's the one thing.
Hmm.
But then I'd say the other thing is that, writing my book, The ESP Enigma, got me into trouble with my medical board without them even reading it. Just the title
Yep.
implying there could be a scientific case made for ESP was enough for them to say this woman's gone off the edge.
Well, let me jump right in, Diane, with my next question, because you must have read my mind to cue this one up so well. Did you face any doubts, fears, or pushback from the scientific or medical community when you first started advocating for a deeper, more empathetic look at these conditions?
Oh, 100% I knew that I was going to get that. And I think that, I mean, there was a, believe it or not, when I was extremely shy, young, I was extremely shy. I wanted everybody to like me. I'd be devastated. I was a perfectionist. I'd be devastated if I got anything less than 100% on a test. I mean, I was just like, so I'm a recovering perfectionist. And and so I did, and I, rather than try to get into discussions and convince people within the academic world that, hey, you really should look at this stuff. And this, I already knew these people would be vehemently against it,
Hmm.
and I also knew that there was just such an invested mindset about how to regard these kids, and and they didn't exist in the same numbers that they do today. But yes, so now, out there in the clinical community, yeah, I see that there's pushback against, thinking that they are, in there, that they can communicate, that they are very bright. Many of them are very, very bright. And yeah, there's pushback, but I'll tell you the reason why I overcame all of those things, the shyness, the perfectionism, the concerns about your, professional, career, making money, just, all of those things. Overall, I came all of that because it really, I'm a truth seeker, number one. And number two, I'm an empath. And to me, it becomes a human rights issue.
Yeah.
And so um, and so that then pushes me forward, but because I believe me, I haven't been doing this because I thought I'd make money or become
Hmm.
become famous or any of that. That
Hmm.
none of that ever was what was motivating for me. It really is wanting to make a difference, wanting to help where I can, and it's just heartbreaking when you see, how but when you see the stories, see the impact on the families and
Hmm.
hear the stories of, these kids who the parents were told to just give up on them.
Yeah.
There's nothing there. And then, they recommended, well, institutionalize them or whatever, but don't expect much. And you had a parent that just said, you know, I'm I'm not going to give up on my kid. And they just love them so much that they spent all of this time with them. And in the process of doing so, they discover, oh my gosh,
Yeah, I'm
you know,
sure you can
there's
imagine the difficulty of my sister-in-law, her first pregnancy being triple boys, right? Already a challenge, and then each one with a level of autism. It's tough to watch people struggling through the situation with so little information to help these people get through it.
That's right. That's right. And so yeah, because I feel, when you see, especially when you see the numbers now, I'm doing this for the kids, but I'm also doing it for the moms and the
Hmm.
dads and the, and the brothers and sisters. And I mean, it's
I
just like
I used to laugh, like when someone
everybody.
has a newborn baby and they're hiring or just you're babysitting or something like that. It's a brand new baby, it's their first baby, and you go over there and they have lists and charts and times and things to do, and they give you the whole rundown, right? I always thought it was funny because when I would go over to babysit for the triplets. You ring the doorbell. The door opens. There's a whish of air, and the mom's gone, and the kid. It's different. It's it's just good luck. I'm out of here. I need a breather.
Well, that's yeah. No, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, and it's hard for them to find somebody who can be a caregiver that's going to be consistently kind and loving and et cetera, et cetera. And so I was having a conversation with a mother yet just yesterday who's having a hard time finding some relief. And she's really, she and I talked about doing some fundraising to get her one of these robots that we could be training,
I
that's what,
I
that's
remember
what she,
hard. I learned hard and fast. Babysitting the triplets was super challenging because you don't get to sleep at any given
yeah,
time. One's awake.
yeah,
In the middle,
yeah.
you put one down, two are sleeping. You're putting one down, one wakes up, and you're like, you've got to be kidding me.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And this mother loves her daughter. I mean, she
Mhm.
wants to be, very involved in her life, but she needs a break every once in a while. Yeah,
Mhm.
just to go do something. Yeah.
Mhm. Well, this brings me to my next question then, Diane. Who were the pioneers, teachers, or individuals in your field who you might say acted as your mentors or fundamentally shaped the perspective of the direction of your research?
Boy, I can't think of very many. I can't think of any. I mean,
Fair enough. Then you're a pioneer.
yeah, I
Here you
really
go.
can't think
You're breaking trail, Diane, which is a beautiful thing for this topic. Interesting. So there wasn't really anybody at all prior to you even delving in this direction.
no, not at all. I've been doing this so I first became interested in autism in '86. And then, it was so rare. I mean, it's only been within the past 20 years that people even have become interested in autism. And, by then I'd already left academia and it's not, I mean, people aren't interested in, people aren't interested in ESP or whatever, it was just this sort of quirky thing that other people would view me as just like, oh, that's Diane's quirky thing that she does, on the side. Well, you know, making a living as a psychotherapist, but I would then use that money to be self-funding. But I mean, I couldn't even get grants. People thought it was too. I applied for grants. People thought it was too controversial,
Hmm.
and so no, I didn't have it. And nobody wanted to touch this with a 10-foot pole.
Can you share a story about a time when your research or your advocacy, so to say, took you out of your comfort zone and forced you to challenge traditional medical dogma? Like, was there ever any like full blown, like heated stuff between you and your industry? Did it ever get actually ugly? Did they ever threaten to pull your license or anything like that?
Well, they took my license. I told you
Ah,
that.
oh, I missed that part. I apologize.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, my license for writing my book, The ESP Enigma, my license was removed on an emergency basis.
On an emergency basis.
On an emergency basis,
I
yeah.
didn't even think something like that existed. Like, quick, take her license.
Yes. And it was, I mean, I had to, really scramble to make sure that any of my patients who were on medications wouldn't go into withdrawal from, this
Wow.
medication. Because even if they're not addicting medications, there are withdrawal syndromes
Hmm.
associated with, psychotropic drugs. And so anyway, yeah, this psychiatrist wrote to the medical board and said that I wrote a book on ESP and that that fact that I would write a book on ESP shows that I must engage in magical thinking, which means that I have become, psychotic, and that at my age it might even mean I have a brain tumor, and that because I didn't have any medical history of any mental illness. And she said, and I'm so smart that, and I'm trained in this profession, so I will know how to answer the questions. So and that I couldn't be believed. That I would, that she anticipated that I would lie if I
Hmm.
was asked directly about whether or not I believed in ESP. And so she thought it was dangerous for me to be practicing. And so I had to prove my sanity. I found a forensic psychologist who did 3 days worth of extensive testing, of course, all on my dime. And he gave me a clean bill of health, and I was able to get my license back as soon as it, was possible, which was the next board meeting. But it was after that that I said, okay, um, I said, I'm going to, I'm going to dedicate my time now to um, trying to do more research, trying to do, what's necessary to really get people to finally, sort of vindicate me, and in the field.
I'm wondering if you just answered my next question or if there's an other instance, because that one sounds like it was probably a bit challenging. But the question is, can you share a specific trial or difficult case or professional setback that almost made you want to quit and how overcoming it made your work stronger? Did you ever find yourself feeling so low from the pushback?
Um, I would say, what I felt more discouraged by was that so I collected amazing footage of experiments. I paid, I had a filmmaker, film it with cameras covering all the angles, had a divider between the kid and the two different therapists. I mean, the kid had 97% accuracy. I mean, just, amazing. Okay. And I presented it at the Science of Consciousness conference. I presented it at the Parapsychological Association, and all that is like 13 years ago, 12, 13 years ago. And people who were in the audience were like jaw dropped, like this is amazing. And yet, crickets in terms of any funding, crickets in terms of any kind of interest in in the community, in the parapsychological community or the consciousness community, in saying, wow, this is let's help you get some funding, or we want to see more of this. I struggled and struggled and struggled, and so that was so less. It's like it's not, neglect is a form of abuse too, right? Just being
Absolutely.
ignored. I was going on podcasts. I was doing everything you could. People were finding out about me. Leslie Keene found out about me and wanted to do a documentary about my work. Um, and um, and then the pandemic happened, and then she just disappeared for 3 years. And in the meantime, made a documentary about UFOs. And so at the time that I met Kai Dickens, I was at a pretty low point. I didn't think anybody gave a damn about this stuff. I'd been trying it for so long to raise money for research, writing grants, get turned down. It's too controversial, despite the reactions that people had to the footage. And so then when she came, and then she actually saw some of the families that I was working with and was just so blown away and so enthusiastic. That gave me more of a boost in the arm. And then when the um, telepathy tapes came out and I saw it just go viral within 3 months, I mean, it surpassed Joe Rogan. I mean, incredible. But at the same time that there was all of this positive attention, boy, were the the fangs and the claws out for me then, I'll tell you, and you see that people are willing to lie, and slander, say things that are not true. I mean, one example is, I wrote a letter before the telepathy tapes came out. I wrote a letter to my medical board saying, I'm not renewing my license. This is a voluntary, choice because I'm retiring,
Mm-hmm.
I'm at retirement age, I'm retiring. Okay. So I didn't want anything looking like I had forgotten to pay my,
Mm-hmm.
to do what you have to do to maintain your
Right.
license. I wanted to make sure they knew that. And yet there was still, a hit piece that said, oh, we contacted the board and they said she had a lapsed license, which makes it sound
Yeah,
like
it
a,
lapsed. It lapsed into retirement.
right, right. So this is what I mean.
Mhm.
They do this little, and it's sort of, yeah, it's
It's
discouraging.
challenging.
It's
Yeah, it
challenging.
can be discouraging. But I hope that you always redouble your efforts and don't get too down about it. I empathize with you a bit because I'm a whistleblower that's testified against activities in Washington D.C. and I appreciate that there's blowback and people that'll do their best to throw you under the bus and discount your words and take the wind out of your sails every chance they get. It's very maddening. Diane, what do you consider your most significant breakthrough, realization, or ultimate boon regarding how we understand the profile of savant abilities?
What do I think is my greatest breakthrough? Wow. Um, well, yeah, I mean, that's there's, I wouldn't even know where to begin with that. I mean, because it's what I've devoted so much of my career to, and I've had a lot of, ahas along the way. I mean, um, I think one of the things that I think for me, more recently, one of the things that I'm really fascinated by is that I started to realize now that many of these savants have the capacity to communicate. I started to realize that they experience a reality that is very similar to the reality that people describe who were mystics, like in, ancient,
Mm-hmm.
ancient times. Okay. They also describe a reality that's very similar to what people who take DMT describe experiencing.
Huh.
So when people are on, in a ayahuasca journey, they describe, experiencing time as nonlinear. That's how these kids describe it.
I
They
didn't know
describe,
that.
yeah,
That's very
yeah,
interesting.
yeah. That's one of the things that's interesting with them is that many of them are precognitive, but the problem is that they're also time blind, and so they can't really then tell you when they can barely tell you when dinner's going to happen, let alone this precog thing that they have.
Okay.
But
Wow.
but
That's
it,
fascinating.
yeah, and so then another thing is that people who do DMT report synesthesia, seeing fractals, this ego dissolution, dissolving, the difference between observer and observed. That's also what they experience. That's the reality they live in. And so the reality they're describing is not only what people who are in altered states described, and people in elevated states, like these Hindu mystics, but it's also the reality that quantum physics came to 100 years ago, with Einstein
Mm-hmm.
and with Bohr and Bohm and quantum mechanics and what that was telling us about the nature of reality. And so one of the reasons why the physicists from 100 years ago were meeting on a regular basis with some of these mystics like Krishnamurti, or a guy named Tagore, is because they thought these guys understand this reality that our mathematics led us to. And the way that I see it is that these savants that I work with are a wonderful place for me to try to actually um, bridge, okay, bridge what physicists have been struggling to do for the past 100 years, which is really understanding that, the nature of reality. Because I feel that our brain, not just me that feels this, I mean, a lot of people have come to the conclusion that our brain job is mainly to to reduce and filter out the amount of information we take in, and these kids are, their filters are, their filters just aren't there. Their sensory gating is compromised, and so it's no wonder they struggle functioning in the world. Yet at the same time, when you can communicate with them, and they tell you certain things, I mean, it's really quite remarkable. And I think it really, I think a lot of the advances in science could actually come from working with them.
Oh, I don't doubt it. It's so worth it because it's such a I don't know, it's such an abnormality worthy of looking into, because it's the benefits on finding out, what's going on with the consciousness. You said the time thing, and it made my brain go in a different direction. When I first started on the internet myself, speaking publicly, I operated under the title on YouTube of deciphering my experience, because there was stuff I wanted to put out there, but I felt like there's a lot of things about myself that I still didn't understand. So I just figured I'll figure it out in real time in public, and have fun, right? One of the things that I've experienced, Diane, and you probably have some thoughts on this, because I don't know how to explain it. It's just something I've experienced. There's been times in my life where I would say that I was put in harm's way. An incident occurred where all of a sudden I became cognizant that, death is imminent. And then something switches. I don't know how to explain it. And it's like time slows down from my perspective. Things are, there's cars smashing into each other, and everything goes into slow motion from what I'm seeing. And then I just have all of the time in the world to make the right decisions. Like, oh, I can see that car is now going, and I can just meander through. And I've experienced this a fistful of times. And the way that I equate it, like you were saying before, when it's typically the job's brain to reduce the amount of information it gives us to make decisions. The only thing I can rationalize is in those moments, my brain is like, hey, we're dead. You need more info to make better decisions. And then I think of like a computer, when you give it too much information to process, it slows down.
Well, that's an interesting take on it. The way I think of it is that, I mean, our experience of time is totally just a construction of the brain. It's not really how time is. Okay. And so because it's a construction of the brain, then it's something that can be manipulated. So when we go into that state, okay, where it's almost like a frozen state. So think about think about animals that, like the deer frozen in the headlights, right? Or think about, the possum that plays dead, okay? There's this effect that, and this is coming from the autonomic nervous system, sympathetic autonomic nervous system, that what that does is it really literally puts on brakes. Okay, it can put on brakes and slow down your body to a point where you're frozen, or or it can put on brakes on your mental space, so that it's just sort of slowly moving like this. And so what's happening is that, I think of it as there being like a physical space and a mental space. And normally they're in some kind of sync with one another. But what happens is that you're uncoupling the timing mechanism between the two. So physically, your agency of your body, you're still able to move fast. You're like, oh shit, I better do this, do that, do this, do that, whereas it's the everything outside of your body, and that's why I call it the mental space. Even
Hmm.
if it's out here, it's still the mental space, if you
Yep.
see what I'm saying. It doesn't have to occur as experienced here. So what happens is that your physical is still going at this speed or even sped up, and that slows down. Yeah, I it's been interesting for me when I was in training, I would sometimes see people who were catatonic and they literally are frozen like a statue. And we would give them like an IV drip of Valium to bring them out of it. And so once the Valium kicked in, if you asked them, what were you experiencing in that state, they'll tell you everything was sped up around them.
Wow.
So it's like they had to physically freeze because everything that they were experiencing in their mental space was just going 100 miles an hour.
Yeah,
It,
it's
it,
wild what
it,
the
it
brain can do for us.
well,
The power of the edit of the brain, so to say.
so that's just how I sort of think of it, is that it really is that time is a brain construct, and so how we navigate time depends upon our state of mind.
I know we were talking earlier about the value of your research being able to help these families. Um, I guess I want to reword this a little bit. Have you figured out a way to translate your high level research and clinical discoveries into practical everyday tools that families and educators can actually use?
Well, yes. I mean, when you say tools, the way that I would put it is this. Okay. First of all, for you to understand that uh, there are estimated to be 30 million of these non-speaking individuals in the world.
Wow.
30 million. Okay.
Non-speaking. Wow.
Yeah. They're about 25% of the autism population. Okay. So that tells you how many autistic, individuals there are in the world nowadays. But anyway, so so there's 30 million of them, but the ones who have been taught spelling or taught a way of communication, only 10,000.
Wow.
And so what I would say is the number one tool I would say is for more and more people to get trained in how to um, work with somebody who's non-speaking to help them have a voice.
Yeah, some other pathway to communication seems to me
Yes,
obligatory.
yes, and then and I'm also doing research in conjunction with the University of Virginia on like eye tracking, because we're trying to see if there's a way in which we can facilitate their communication, just like Stephen Hawking had, he had a muscle in his cheek that he used to communicate. It was Bluetooth, he was Bluetooth connected to a computer, and he was able to move because he had ALS, and so he was in a wheelchair, and he had no motor movement. Well, we're trying to find something like that for the autistic individuals, because their main problem in communication is in the sensory motor system. Okay, so finding some way that they don't have to put all of that effort into being able to communicate, number one. Okay, huge, huge. um, Number two, though, is I have a pretty good hypothesis about what's going on with them, and I would like to see them um, um, be given tools for emotional self-regulation. Okay, because that's what a lot of the families that have these kids, and teachers that work with it, one of their biggest challenges is that the kid can go from 0 to 100 like that. Okay. I don't know if you've seen it with your nephews, but
Yes, the moods can change rather rapidly.
yeah, yeah.
And it's very
And
challenging to figure out what caused the change.
exactly, exactly. And so so I have some ideas about what that is and ways in which we can improve that because, if we can help them to be in a calmer space, help them find a way to communicate. I mean, just think about how much that would enrich everybody's lives.
Oh, absolutely, for sure. Diane, as public understanding of autism and savants continues to evolve, how has your own worldview shifted or resurrected from when you first began your career to today?
Wow. Well, what I would say is that I have become, I went from being, I was trained as a neuroscientist. I was very much immersed in the materialist model. Okay. Yeah. And now I'm 180 degrees from that. 180 degrees.
So this version of Diane wouldn't gotten along well with fresh college grad Diane.
Oh, we would have gotten along because Diane just loves to get along with
Okay.
people. So we would have gotten along. It's just that I would have, I would have thought, well, I would have found me very interesting to talk with, but I wouldn't have been able to quite know. Uh, I'd find it interesting in theory, but it's like the penny wouldn't have dropped, or when you put a coin
I feel like your younger self would have been looking at your older self like she's not very scientific.
yeah. Although when scientists talk with me, they see that I actually am very scientific. I can joke a little bit about the woo, but I don't. I'm really, really approaching this as somebody who really is a serious scientist,
Oh,
and
absolutely.
I've got colleagues who are taking me very serious, who are both physicists and neuroscientists.
Excellent. Well, I have one last question for you, Diane. If you had to distill your life's efforts and the elixir of your knowledge into one core message for the public, what is the one thing you want the world to understand about autistic and savant individuals?
What's the one thing I want them to understand about both of them? Wow. Well, I would say that they are engaging in the so I like to call them neurodiverse. Okay, so these individuals who are neurodiverse, I believe, are the answer, the solution to the planet. Okay, what do I mean by that? Um, Number one, it's the level of consciousness that they're operating out of, but it's also that they have the type of cognitive style that approaches solving problems in a way that's very different from the thinking style that got us the problems in the first place. And this is I don't remember who it was that said it. I think it gets attributed to Einstein all the time, where it's like that you can't solve problems using the same kind of thinking that that created them, right? And I look at, how here we are 100 years after all of these revolutionary changes within science. And yet, we've had all of these technological advancements, and yet everything is failing, right? Because we have not solved these problems in a way that we haven't solved the biggest problem of all, and that's human consciousness and understanding human consciousness. And that's what these savants say they're here to do, is they say that they are here to evolve humanity.
Oh my goodness, Diane. I hope they can do it. I hope they can do it.
And they want to contribute to the scientific advancements.
When you were saying about Einstein and his statement for problems, I couldn't help have my brain go to the idea of, just like a kid, have the government fixing the problems the government made that we're all suffering nowadays.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
But
Right.
excellent, Diane. Thank you very much for joining me here today and getting this information out to the people. I want to remind everybody that Diane and myself will both be speaking at the Snippy 2026 event in Mosca, Colorado. It'll be from August 13th to 16th. It is a fantastic location right there in nature. I swear to you, it's good for your consciousness. You will come out feeling better. And if anybody's interested in going to that event, you can go to snippy.space to find out more. But before we do depart, Diane, is there any information in regards to people, if they want to follow your work, how they can do that?
Sure. Yeah. So first of all, for people to know, I have a nonprofit institute now called Hennacy Institute. And so it's hennacyinstitute.org. And so, and we're on, all of the different social platforms. I personally don't have a lot of time to do social media posting, but people can also go to my website, drdianehennacy.com. And then there's also a website for my nonprofit, hennacyinstitute.org.
Excellent. Well, I hope everybody checks it out and follows your work. I look forward to meeting you and seeing your presentation at the Snippy event. And I hope that you have an excellent day, Diane. Thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Bye-bye.